In 1960, every woman knew 30 dinners by heart. Cheap, fast, homemade meals cooked in under 20 minutes. No frozen boxes, no instant packets, no complicated recipes. Just simple food that fed entire families for less than $1 a night. Then suddenly they vanished. Not like a trend, like a forgotten language. A $1 billion food industry convinced people these meals were old-fashioned and embarrassing. Slowly, the women who mastered cooking, budgeting, and feeding families from almost nothing stopped passing those skills down. An entire generation grew up without them. These are the 30 forgotten dinners they stopped making. And today, we're bringing them back. Number 30. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The men who came back from the war already knew this one. They'd eaten it in Army mess halls from 1942 to 1945 under a name I can't say here, and they'd complained about it the whole time. But the moment their wives made it right, with a real cream sauce and a heavy hand of black pepper and toast that had actual butter on it, they stopped complaining. A 2.5-ounce jar of dried beef cost 19 cents in 1962. One skillet, 8 minutes. Rich, salty, blanketing the kind of food that tells your body the day is over. Today it's a retro brunch item at $14 a plate with microgreens on top. Same jar, same flour, same black pepper. Number 29. Salmon patties. A 1.5-ounce can of pink salmon cost 29 cents in 1961, and out of it came dinner for 4 in Appalachian kitchens, sharecropper households across the rural South, and working-class homes from Pittsburgh to Peoria. She mixed it with crushed crackers and 1 egg and pressed it into rounds with her palm. Hot skillet, a little bacon grease, brown on both sides. The smell that came off them was something between the sea and the griddle, ancient and smoky and right. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Canned pink salmon had more bioavailable omega, 3S per serving, than most fresh fish available to working-class families. The canning process concentrated it. Today we call them salmon cakes and charge $18. Same 3 ingredients. Number 28. Skillet fried bologna with mustard. Go ahead and laugh. They always laugh, and then they try it, and they go quiet. A pound of bologna cost 39 cents in 1,965 inches, the factory towns of eastern Ohio and the mill districts of the Carolinas. You scored the edges with 4 cuts so the meat wouldn't curl, laid it in a dry cast-iron skillet on high, and left it alone. The bologna blistered, the scored edges crisped back. The fat rendered and smoked slightly, and the smell was something between a cookout and a diner at 7 in the morning. Flip once. Yellow mustard, not Dijon. Yellow, and that was dinner. Hot, fatty, protein-forward, 5 minutes start to finish. This was not poor man's food. This was a shift worker's meal, built for a body that had spent 10 hours doing hard physical labor. She knew what she was doing. Number 27. Tomato soup gravy over white bread. In the mill towns of western Pennsylvania and the row houses of working-class New England, this was Tuesday. A can of Campbell's tomato soup cost 12 cents in 1963. You opened it, thinned it with a splash of milk, stirred in a knob of butter, a pinch of sugar to cut the tin taste, and poured it hot over 2 slices of white bread that soaked it up like a sponge. Orange and warm and faintly sweet. What the women making it did not know, and what food scientists would confirm decades later, is that cooked tomatoes release lycopene in concentrations the raw fruit cannot match. Every bowl was delivering an antioxidant load that a modern supplement bottle struggles to replicate. She didn't know the word lycopene. She knew her children cleaned their plates. That was enough. Number 26. Eggs in a nest. A dozen eggs cost 57 cents in 1962. A loaf of bread was 22 cents. You cut a circle from the center of a slice of bread, melted butter in the skillet, laid the bread flat, cracked the egg into the hole. Cooked until the white set. Flipped once, 30 seconds. the yolk still soft, the bread crisped golden butter. You fried the cut circle alongside nothing wasted, and ate it first while the egg finished. This was Tuesday night dinner in 1,000 small apartments from Baltimore to Boise. The food media of the 2010s renamed it Eggs in Purgatory and eventually added truffle oil and called it an innovation. It was not an innovation. It was a tired woman's Tuesday, and it was perfect. Number 25. Pan-fried potatoes and onions. A 10-pound bag of potatoes cost 49 cents in 1961. In Irish immigrant households in South Boston and coal patch towns of western Pennsylvania, the answer to dinner on an empty brain was always the same: fry the potatoes. Slice them with the onion, cast iron on high, bacon fat or butter, press them down, and then leave them alone. That was the discipline. Let the bottom go genuinely brown before you turn them. What happened in that skillet was the Maillard reaction, though nobody in a coal patch town in 1955 had that word. They just knew the difference between pale, soft potatoes and potatoes with a crust that snapped under the fork. In parts of rural Pennsylvania, they called this poor man's steak. It was not poor. It was mastery. Number 24. Canned tomatoes and elbow macaroni. In the Italian-American neighborhoods of South Philadelphia, this dish did not have a name. It was just what you made. A box of elbow macaroni cost 19 cents in 1962. A 2 8-ounce can of whole peeled tomatoes was 23 cents. You boiled the pasta, crushed the tomatoes in the pot by hand. You could hear them give way. That wet split added garlic, olive oil, red pepper, salt. Folded the underdone pasta into the sauce while both were still hot. Let the starch finish thickening it. 8 minutes. One pot. 42 cents. Today, this is on Italian restaurant menus as pasta al pomodoro, rustic style. The menu says at $22 a plate. The rusticity was not a design choice. It was a Wednesday night, and she was tired, and it was perfect. Number 23. Sardines on crackers with hot sauce. In the Portuguese fishing communities of New Bedford and the working waterfront neighborhoods of coastal Georgia, a tin of sardines was not an acquired taste. It was dinner. 15 cents in 1964. You opened the tin, laid them on saltines, hit them with Crystal or Texas Pete, and you ate them at the kitchen table with the newspaper open. Nothing cooked, nothing dirtied. The nutrition science on sardines has only gotten more emphatic in the decades since omega, 3S, calcium from the soft bones, B12, selenium, vitamin D. A 1.5-cent tin delivered a micronutrient load a modern pharmacy would struggle to match. Grandma just called it supper. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 22. Pinto beans and cornbread. 9 cents. That is what a pound of pinto beans cost in 1960. In the Appalachian Hill Country of eastern Tennessee, in the small farm towns of central Texas, in the sharecropper households of the Mississippi Delta, that pound of beans was dinner for a family of 4, and it was not an apology. Quick soak, salt pork or ham hock, black pepper, an onion from the garden, cornbread from the cast iron. You broke the cornbread into the beans, and the pot liquor soaked in, and it became one thing. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. A cup of cooked pinto beans delivers 15 grams of protein, 15 grams of fiber, and nearly half the daily recommended iron for women. For 9 cents a pound, no supplement, no fortification, just beans, the way they had always been beans. Number 21. Bread soup. Panada, bread broth. The name depended on what country your grandmother's mother came from. In Italian-American households in Boston's North End, in the coal company towns where Polish and Slovak and Ukrainian immigrants settled, and in rural southern homes where nothing was wasted because nothing could be afforded to waste, This was the oldest quick dinner in the Western world. Stale bread torn into a bowl. Near boiling water or vegetable broth poured over, 2 minutes. Salt, a drizzle of oil, an egg stirred in if there was one. The bread swelled and softened into something between soup and porridge, thick and warm and filling in the way that starts in your stomach and radiates outward until your shoulders drop and the day finally lets go. Nearly free. Carried here across the Atlantic by people who arrived with nothing and fed their families on less. This was not poverty food. This was the oldest form of genius there is. Number 20. Rice and pan drippings gravy. In Louisiana, Cajun country, and the rural South from Texas to Georgia, there was a jar kept by the stove, not hidden right there, next to the salt. It held the drippings from whatever meat had been cooked that week. Bacon fat, pork drippings, chicken fat. When the jar had enough, you made gravy. A little flour, a little water. The drippings heated until they bloomed and thickened and went the color of dark caramel, poured over long-grain white rice that had cooked in salted water. A 2-pound bag of rice cost 25 cents in 1963. The gravy cost nothing, it was already in the jar. What you got was deep, porky, savory, and rich. Nothing wasted. Everything used. A complete dinner from what anyone else would have thrown away. Number 19. Fried egg sandwich with hot sauce. 2 eggs. 2 slices of bread. A knob of butter in the skillet. You cracked the eggs in, broke the yolks, so they spread flat. A fried egg sandwich needs a flat yolk, not a round one, so it doesn't slide out the back when you bite. And you fried them until the edges went lacy and crisp, and the center was just barely set. Salt, black pepper, hot sauce. Press the bread down on top. That was dinner, complete protein, ready in 4 minutes. In working-class households from Detroit to Dallas, this was the dinner you made when the week had been hard and your brain was gone, and you needed something hot in your body before you could think about anything else. Today, it's a $12 artisanal egg sandwich at a brunch spot with a name written in chalk. Then, it was just Tuesday. Number 18. Canned peas and butter over mashed potatoes. In Midwestern farmhouses and small-town Southern kitchens, this was the dinner you made when there was almost nothing left in the house, and payday was 2 days away. Potatoes boiled and mashed with butter and a splash of milk. The 1 0-pound bag was 49 cents in 1961, and a can of peas, 14 cents. Heated in their own liquid and poured over the top with a generous additional knob of butter. The butter was not indulgence. The fat-soluble vitamins in those peas, A, K, a trace of E, require dietary fat to absorb into the body. She didn't know the biochemistry. She knew the butter made it better, and that her family got up from the table satisfied. Both things were true. Number 17. Crackers and milk. This one goes back further than the 1960s, way back. In rural New England farmhouses and Appalachian homes and Midwest prairie kitchens, broken crackers in a bowl of cold milk or warm milk. If it was winter and the kitchen was cold and you needed something that felt like heat, was a legitimate dinner. Not a Depression relic that should have died by 1960. A living tradition. A 2 9-cent sleeve of crackers and a 2 5-cent half-gallon of milk in 1963 fed 2 people for dinner and asked nothing of anyone. No stove, no skillet, no heat, unless you wanted it. For the oldest members of a household, for the nights when chewing was hard and the body wanted something gentle, this was not giving up. This was feeding yourself with intelligence and without apology. Number 16. Canned bean soup with vinegar and pepper. A can of Campbell's bean soup cost 15 cents in 1963. You opened it, added water or milk to thin it, set it on the stove, and then you did the thing that separated the women who knew from the women who didn't. A splash of apple cider vinegar. A heavy turn of black pepper. Maybe a pinch of dried thyme if the jar was out. Those three additions transformed a flat, sweet canned soup into something complex and savory, something that tasted like it had been cooking since morning. The vinegar brightened it, the pepper deepened it. The thyme made it smell like someone's grandmother's kitchen in 1947. Plant protein, fiber, a complete dinner for 15 cents. She didn't call it plant-based, she just called it soup. Number 15. Fried cornmeal mush. A pound of cornmeal cost 3 cents in 1933. By 1961, it was still only 9 cents. In Appalachian kitchens and the rural South and Midwestern farmhouses from Ohio to Iowa, leftover cornmeal mush cooked the day before, poured into a pan, set in the cold, was sliced thick the next evening, laid in a skillet of hot lard, and fried until the outside went golden and crisp and the inside stayed soft and dense and faintly sweet. You ate it with sorghum molasses or bacon drippings or just salt. That was dinner. Today we call this polenta. We put braised short rib on top of it and charge $24 at Italian-American restaurants. Grandma just called it mush. She fried it in lard. She was 30 years ahead of every chef who ever put it on a menu. Number 14. Stovetop tuna and noodles. Everyone remembers the casserole version, cream of mushroom soup, breadcrumb top, 45 minutes in the oven. But that was the Sunday version. The Tuesday version was faster and, quietly, better. A 2 9-cent can of tuna in 1963. A 1 9-cent bag of egg noodles. A knob of butter. A splash of the pasta water, salt, black pepper, a spoonful of mustard if you had it. The noodles cooked in 8 minutes. You drained them, tossed them with the tuna broken in rough chunks, the butter melting into the pasta water, and turning it into something almost silky. No oven, 1 pot. Dinner for 3. The casserole got the reputation. The stovetop version fed more families on more tired nights than any cookbook ever recorded. Number 13. Pan-toasted peanut butter and banana sandwich. A jar of peanut butter cost 33 cents in 1963. Bananas were 19 cents a pound. On the hard weeks, the weeks when the numbers didn't add up no matter how many times you ran them, this was dinner, not lunch. Dinner. Peanut butter thick on both slices, banana sliced thin, edge to edge, pressed together, butter in the skillet, toasted golden on both sides until the peanut butter went warm, and the banana softened to something almost caramelized. The fat and protein from the peanut butter, the natural sugar from the banana, the carbohydrate from the bread it hit in a way that fed a child completely and put them to sleep full. That was the goal on hard weeks. She hit it every time. Elvis did not invent this. Tired mothers invented this long before Graceland had a kitchen. Number 12. Canned corn and butter over rice. In the small farmhouses of central Mississippi and the kitchen apartments of working-class Chicago in the early 1960s, white rice in salted water and a can of creamed corn, 14 cents in 1963, heated with a generous knob of butter and black pepper, poured over the rice while still steaming. That was dinner. Sweet and starchy and warm and buttery, and it asked nothing of you. No chopping, no timing, no skill beyond the ability to still be standing at the end of a day that had tried to put you on the floor. In 2018, food media celebrated a Korean version of this corn, butter, a little cheese, over rice, as a comfort food revelation, charging $12 a bowl. That is not a revelation. That is a tired woman in 1963 Mississippi being told 60 years later that what she already knew was new. Number 11. Liverwurst on rye with onion. In the German and Eastern European immigrant communities of Milwaukee and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh's South Side, a pound of liverwurst was 35 cents in 1964. You sliced it thick on dark rye bread, laid raw onion rings over it, sharp, biting, white onion, not sweet, added a smear of mustard, and that was dinner. No cooking, no heat required. What liverwurst contains, per ounce is almost embarrassing. More vitamin A than almost any other food in the American diet. More iron per serving than a beef steak. B12. In concentrations that modern supplements strain to replicate. The immigrant communities who kept eating it into the 1960s while their neighbors switched to processed sandwich meats were not behind. They were, nutritionally, the smartest people in the room. They just didn't know to brag about it. Number 10. Tomato and mayonnaise sandwich. This one is summer. Only summer, and if you grew up in the right part of this country, you already know exactly what I'm talking about before I say another word. In the rural South and the Appalachian communities of Tennessee and North Carolina and the small farm towns of Virginia, garden tomatoes came in July and August with a generosity that felt almost reckless. More than you could can, more than you could give away, more than the neighbors wanted after the third basket left on their porch. And in those weeks, the tomato sandwich was dinner, not lunch, not a side dish. Dinner, 3 nights running, and nobody at the table complained once. White bread. Duke's mayonnaise, 19 cents a jar in 1963, and ask any Southern woman over 60, and she will tell you without blinking that it had to be Duke's. Specifically, always Duke's, because Duke's had no added sugar, and the tomato was already sweet enough, and the mayonnaise needed to be tangy to cut through it, and any other brand was a compromise she was not prepared to make. A thick slice of tomato, not thin, not the way you'd slice it for a sandwich up north, but thick, a full half-inch, so it held its shape when you bit through and didn't disappear into the bread. Salt drawn on with a heavy hand. Black pepper cracked coarse. That was it. 2 minutes. Nothing cooked, nothing heated. The tomato was still warm from the garden, warm from the sun, not from a stove. And the salt drew the juice out immediately, and it ran into the white bread and stained it pink. And the bread softened, and the mayonnaise mixed with the juice, and became something you couldn't replicate with a cold grocery store tomato, no matter how hard you tried. The whole thing had to happen at exactly the right moment in exactly the right season. She knew that. She'd been doing it every summer for 30 years. This was not poor food. This was not a shortcut or a failure of ambition. This was a woman eating the best possible thing at its absolute peak moment, assembled in the simplest possible way, so nothing about it got between you and the tomato. That is not laziness. That is the highest principle of cooking, the one every Michelin-starred chef pretends to have invented. She had been practicing it in her backyard since 1931. Today we call this heirloom tomato tartine and charge $16 at farm-to-table restaurants in cities where nobody has a garden. Same tomato, same mayonnaise. Different story told about who gets the credit. Number 4. Red chili enchiladas with scrambled egg. The chile took an hour to make. That hour was the price of the meal, and also the reason it was extraordinary. Dried ancho chiles, 3 or 4 of them, the wrinkled dark pods that smell of raisins and earth when you first open the bag, stemmed and seeded and toasted flat in a dry pan until they softened and sent up a smoke that made your eyes sting slightly. Then soaked in hot water for 20 minutes. Then blended with garlic, cumin, a pinch of oregano, salt, and a cup of the soaking water until the sauce was dark and smooth and the color of old burgundy. Corn tortillas dipped in the hot sauce, laid flat in a pan, topped with scrambled egg and a crumble of white cheese and a sliver of white onion, folded over. 3 of them on a plate, no lettuce. No sour cream. Nothing on the side except a stack of warm tortillas and the rest of the sauce in a clay bowl for dipping. In the El Paso and New Mexico corridor in the 1930s, a plate of these enchiladas cost under 6 cents to make and delivered iron from the chile, complete protein from the egg and corn combination, and capsaicin from the dried chiles that stimulated circulation and metabolic rate. Grandma just called it lunch. She made it on a Tuesday with no ceremony and no recipe written down anywhere. The recipe was in her hands. When her hands were gone, so was the recipe, unless someone remembered, unless someone watched carefully enough. Number 3. Sweet raisin tamales. The sweet ones, the ones children waited for, the ones that appeared at the communal tamale making alongside the savory versions, made from the same corn paste but sweetened with raw cane sugar and mixed with lard, beaten until it was white and airy and smelled faintly of something almost floral. The filling was simple. Raisins soaked until soft, sometimes a little shredded coconut that arrived at the border market from the coast. Sometimes just the corn paste itself, sweetened and tinted pink with a little beet juice or red coloring when the family could afford it. Wrapped in the corn husk, steamed. Unwrapped to reveal something that looked almost festive, pale, pink, or ivory, spotted with dark raisins, fragrant with cinnamon and raw sugar. They were not dessert in the sense that they came after the meal. They were dessert in the sense that they were made with extra care and given to children and eaten slowly, standing in the kitchen while the steam from the tamale pot still fogged the window. They were evidence that poverty and pleasure were not mutually exclusive, that a family with almost nothing could still make something beautiful and sweet, and given specifically to the children because the children deserved something beautiful too. A dozen sweet raisin tamales in 1940 cost under 8 cents in ingredients, what they cost in love and labor and accumulated knowledge that is not a number. Number 2. Thick hot chocolate corn porridge. Thicker than the plain corn porridge. Darker. The smell of it coming through the wall of the house in the morning was the smell of being safe. This is corn paste dissolved in water and cooked until thick, then deepened with Mexican chocolate, the coarse ground dark chocolate mixed with cinnamon and sugar that came in rough discs wrapped in paper from the market. A disc of chocolate dissolved into the hot porridge, stirred constantly with a wooden spoon or a carved wooden whisk. One of the first tools a young woman was given when she set up her own kitchen, until it was smooth and hot and thick enough that the spoon stood up in it. In the border communities throughout the 1920s and 1930s, this was the cold morning drink, the winter morning drink. The drink you made when someone was sick or grieving or simply cold and in need of something that cost almost nothing and delivered everything. A pot of it for 6 people cost under 5 cents. A disc of dark chocolate at 2 cents. Corn paste at a penny. Raw sugar at 2 cents. Water for free. The flavonoids in dark chocolate improve blood flow and reduce inflammatory markers. The corn paste provided complex carbohydrates. The fat in the chocolate provided satiety. The cinnamon supported insulin regulation. The warmth of it, held in a clay cup between 2 cold hands on a February morning in New Mexico, that is not measurable by any instrument of nutritional science, but it was real. It was as real as anything. Number 1. Corn paste and salt. That is the whole recipe. In the worst years, the years when the work had dried up and the garden had nothing left and the money was gone and there would be nothing else, until something changed. A woman mixed the last of the corn paste with water and a pinch of salt and cooked it on the iron griddle. Flat rounds, slightly thicker than a tortilla, cooked until they had dark spots and smelled of corn and heat. Nothing on them, nothing with them. This fed children. This fed working men who went out in the morning into whatever the day had. This held a family together on the days when holding together was the only goal left. It was the distillation of everything, of the nixtamalization that made the corn nutritionally complete, of the generations of knowledge embedded in the hands that shaped it, of the dignity that refused to call hunger a reason to stop eating together at a table, of the understanding that the simplest things, made with the most knowledge, are never truly poor. In the Rio Grande Valley in 1933, a woman could feed her family of 5 for 2 cents with corn paste and salt. She did not call it survival food. She did not call it anything. She put it on the table and they ate it, and they were still there the next day. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Closing. Bring the thick hot chocolate porridge back to the stove. Soak the hominy tonight. Toast the dried chiles tomorrow morning until the smoke rises and your eyes sting and your kitchen smells like something that was almost lost. The women who made these meals were not making do. They were not cooking from desperation. They were practicing an accumulated science of nourishment, 3,000 years of knowledge about corn and legume and foraged green and slow-cooked bone that took this country less than 30 years to dismantle. They did it with government pamphlets and school policies and mass deportations and a food industry that needed people to forget what they already knew so they could sell them something worse at a higher price. The grandmothers of the border knew things about feeding a family that no nutrition label has ever captured. They knew it in their hands and in their pots and in the pre-dawn dark of their kitchens when everyone else was still asleep. They were not primitive. They were not poor cooks making poor food. They were geniuses working in a tradition so deep it looked like instinct. The food industry won. For a few decades, they won completely. But you are here, and the recipes exist. And the wild purslane is still growing along the arroyo if you know where to look, and dried hominy still costs less than $1 a pound, and the dried chiles are at the market right now, and the knowledge, most of it, is still recoverable. One pot this week, just one. Comment below and tell me which one your grandmother made. Number 6. Dry toasted vermicelli braised in Chile tomato broth. This is not pasta. This is something older than pasta's presence in any Texas kitchen, and the technique is the thing, the technique that no box of angel hair can give you, no matter how long you cook it. You start with dry vermicelli noodles. You put them in a pan with a spoonful of hot lard, and you toast them dry, straight from the package, stirring constantly until they turn the color of a penny and the kitchen fills with a smell like toasted grain and warm starch. This takes 3 minutes. This is the moment that makes this dish irreplaceable. The toasting closes the surface of the noodle, changes its texture fundamentally, gives it a nuttiness that survives the braising that comes next. Then the blended tomato and garlic and dried chile go into the same hot pan over the toasted noodles, and the whole thing sizzles and steams, and the noodles begin absorbing the liquid from the bottom up. You add water or broth, cover the pan, and in 12 minutes you have something entirely unlike boiled pasta. Toasted, yielding at the center, smoky from the dried chile, slightly sticky from the tomato starch. In the border communities of all the border states from the 1930s through the 1950s, this was the weeknight meal, vermicelli, at 4 cents a pound. Tomato, garlic, dried chili cents more. One pot. 20 minutes. Nothing wasted. This technique, toasting dry pasta in fat before cooking, appears in the Turkish tradition, in the Lebanese tradition, in the North African tradition. It is ancient and global and brilliant. And it was nearly lost when the boxed dinner mix arrived and told everyone that convenience meant opening a package. That is not progress. That is the replacement of a 400-year-old technique with a product that cost 50 times as much and produced a fraction of the flavor. Number 5. Green chile tripe soup with purslane. The green version. Less known than the red, more specific to the Arizona borderlands and the ranching communities that straddled the line. Tripe again cleaned, boiled long, cut into pieces, but this time in a broth, built from tomatillos and fresh green chiles, and the purslane that grew wild along every water source in the desert Southwest. The purslane wilted into the broth in the last 10 minutes of cooking, turning it a deep, almost murky green, and gave it an earthiness that the tomatillo's tartness cut through perfectly. The tomatillo provided vitamin C. The purslane provided the omega-3s. The tripe provided the collagen and the zinc and the extraordinary richness of slowly cooked organ meat. In a family of 8 in Tucson in 1938, a pot of this green tripe soup cost under 20 cents and fed everyone at the table twice, once that night and again the next morning, when it was always better. There was a woman in every colonia who was known for her version of this soup. People came to her kitchen on Sunday mornings the way people now go to brunch. She did not charge. She fed people because she had made enough, and she understood that feeding people was not a transaction, it was a practice. It was a form of community architecture that costs nothing when the ingredients are free and the labor is shared. Number 19, herring and potato, 2 ingredients. That was the entire meal. Cold salt herring, rinsed if there was enough water to rinse it, eaten as is if there wasn't, laid over a boiled potato that had gone slightly gray from sitting. A raw onion sliced thin if you were fortunate enough to have one. Scandinavian immigrants called their version sildesalat. Polish families called it śledź ziemniakami. The names were different. The meal was identical. Sailors had eaten this combination for centuries before a single immigrant ship crossed the Atlantic. It was the mathematics of protein and starch and preservation working out to the simplest possible solution. It fed the crossing. Then it fed the tenement years, the cold water flats in Chicago and Cleveland and Pittsburgh, where the same 2 ingredients, costing almost nothing, fed families through the winters. Then it fed the grandchildren. And then the grandchildren grew up and got better jobs and moved to neighborhoods where nobody ate like that anymore. And they were ashamed of it because America had taught them to be ashamed of it. That is not progress. That is a family forgetting where it came from. Number 18, black bread and schmaltz. Schmaltz is rendered poultry fat, chicken fat most often, or goose fat. Clarified slowly over low heat until it was golden and smooth, and smelled faintly of onion if you'd cooked onion in it during the rendering, which you always did if you were doing it right. Jewish families rendered it from every scrap. Nothing was wasted. The crispy bits left over after rendering the grabines were eaten separately, salted as a kind of cook's reward. The schmaltz itself went into a small jar and onto the bread, spread thick on black rye bread, maybe a pinch of coarse salt, maybe a sliver of raw onion pressed on top. That was the meal. It cost nothing, because it was made from the parts of the animal that the butcher couldn't sell. And it was the last food many of these families ate before they left the old world, packed into the bundle at the bottom, eaten in the steerage bunk in the dark, with Ellis Island somewhere ahead in the fog. The food industry erased it within one generation. Procter and Gamble introduced Crisco in 1911 and spent the next 20 years telling immigrant housewives that animal fat was dirty and dangerous, and that their grandmothers' methods were backward. They hired home economists. They published cookbooks. They sent representatives into immigrant neighborhoods with less samples and pamphlets. And it worked. Within a generation, schmaltz was gone from most American kitchens. The jar on the shelf replaced by a blue can. That is not progress. That is a corporation reaching into a family's kitchen and removing something irreplaceable for profit. Number 17, millet porridge. Before wheat. Before rice reached Eastern Europe in any quantity. Before corn came back from the Americas. There was millet, small, golden, slightly sweet when cooked, and so ancient that archaeologists have found it in Ukrainian cooking vessels that predate recorded history. Ukrainian and Russian and Romanian immigrants carried it dry in cloth sacks and cooked it in the steerage galley into a porridge that was thicker than oatmeal and more filling than it looked. A pound cost 2 cents in 1910. It disappeared from American immigrant tables within a generation, replaced first by oatmeal, then by cold cereal in a box with a cartoon on the front. Today, millet sits in the bulk bins at natural food stores, rediscovered by people who have no idea their great-grandmothers carried it across the Atlantic. Number 16. Dried figs and dates. Greek immigrants carried them. Syrian and Lebanese families carried them. Armenian passengers carried them in cloth pouches worn close to the body because they were the only sweetness available in sweetness on a 3-week crossing with nothing to look forward to, was precious in a way that had nothing to do with calories. Dried figs cost 5 cents a pound in 1910. They lasted indefinitely. A single fig, eaten slowly, could make a child stop crying on a rough night in the North Atlantic. Every Greek grandmother in America until the 1970s kept dried figs in the house. Then the grandchildren decided they preferred candy bars. The food industry was happy to agree. Number 15. Chickpea stew. Greek immigrants called it revithia. They cooked it with olive oil and wild herbs, whatever dried herbs they'd packed, and a handful of lemon juice if they had lemon, and salt and patience. Chickpeas cost 4 cents a pound in 1910. A pot of revithia fed 6 people and kept them full for most of a day, 'cause chickpeas are dense with protein and complex carbohydrates that release slowly and keep hunger away longer than almost any other food at that price. They knew this without a glycemic index. They knew it because the food worked, and because their grandmothers had served it on fast days when the church required simplicity, and the simple thing happened to be exactly right. Today you find chickpea stew on every Mediterranean restaurant menu in America at $13 a bowl. The description on the menu calls it traditional. It is traditional. It just used to be free.